All right, coming at you from scorching hot BC at this point. This is Left of the Valley 2.0. My name is Kevin, and I want to start a company that makes condoms and coffins. And my slogan's going to be, "We got you covered whether you're coming or going."
Mwah, mwah.
As usual is the lovely Christine. Christine, how are you doing, dear?
I'm doing very well, thank you. And you?
Good, good. I'm doing great. I wanted to do this very special show because we got a very special guest with us. We have Dr. Veronica Drantz. Dr. Drantz, thank you so much for being at Left of the Valley.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Give a large applause for those friends. Dr. Drantz, it's been quite a while since you've been on the show, so maybe you'd be so kind to give us a quick bio as to who Dr. Veronica Drantz is.
Okay. Well, I have a PhD in physiology, so I'm a physiologist, and I have been teaching most of my life medical professionals. And it's going on 50 years. I've been teaching in a program that's a doctoral program in anesthesia, where I teach physiology and all the related sciences, molecular biology, etc. And for about the last 20 years, I have been following the research concerning sexual diversity, sexual development, and how what we know about gender identity and sexual orientation from a scientific perspective.
So for the layperson like me, you are the doctor that teaches other doctors about stuff.
Yeah, basically,
Okay.
yes.
So she's much, much smarter than I am at this point. So we're gonna get that out of the way right away.
She's a doctor and a doctor,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, a physician and
No.
Oh, okay. I thought I know you're a PhD. But I thought I knew you were a PhD, but I also thought that you were a physician or had practiced at some point or
but I teach medical people.
Okay.
Yeah. So in other words, when the doctors have a question, they go to her.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, if it concerns the science, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's awesome. So today I wanted to do a special show talking about the LGBTQ community. And the reason I wanted to do that is because I have a lot of people in my life that are both on the liberal side of the spectrum politically and on the conservative side. I have some people that are very close to me that are actually kind of conservative. And a lot of them are confused, for lack of a better term. They're confused about, the LGBT community. They don't know what to think. They hear a lot of really nasty talk about it, and they don't know the science. So I thought, let's bring a scientist to talk about this, and let's expose the science. Because you know what? Disclosure here, I was that person too, a long, long time ago. I was a person, like I said, I was never against anybody to the LGBT. I was never mean to anybody that was part of the LGBT community, but I didn't understand them. I didn't get it. I didn't get how it worked. And I used to say horrible things. I used to say things like, well, I've never seen a gay tiger, so I don't see why a gay person exists. And I used to say all these horrible things. I know better now. But I'm hoping this broadcast today will help, with the help of the good doctor, will help other people that were what I once was, help them understand the LGBTQ community. So, first questions first, I guess. Doctor, I know this is a very broad question, but what does the scientific community think of the whole LGBTQ movement at this point, the community?
Oh, the movement?
Oh, the community.
Can I maybe
I can't comment on that. I don't know what movement. No.
Can I reduce it down to, I guess, in my observation, some people are very committed to the position that there's male and female and no diversity in between, or very little diversity in between. And I think that they're not up to date on their research, if that makes sense. And I think this is going to be super helpful for people who, even people who, my best friend was gay growing up, and when I was a teenager, so I've had plenty of influences in my life, and I don't really hold those biases, but I think a lot of people don't get that there can be, I guess, diversity, and it's
diversity.
Prenatal diversity.
Here, look, everybody took biology 101, yeah? I mean, if you did.
Well, yeah, but some people took it 40 years ago, didn't they?
Well,
right?
but what everybody should have gotten out of that course is that nature loves diversity.
Mhm.
Look
Yeah.
at you and look at me. I mean, there's never been another you, and there never will be another you.
Thank goodness
Yeah.
for that.
You're the only one you. How many billions of us are there? And there'll be billions more, hopefully, and will each of us be an individual. Even genetically identical twins are not really identical.
Yeah,
So
that's fascinating.
nature
Yeah.
loves diversity, and
Mhm.
all of us have mutant genes, new versions of genes and weird proteins that everybody does, and there's differences in almost any and every aspect that you can think of about a human being. And we, most of those differences, we just accept as, well, that's you or that's me.
Yeah.
That's what makes us the individuals that we are. But as soon as those differences have something to do with sex, oh my God, everybody's panties are in a bunch. And I believe that is the influence of religion, especially the Abrahamic religions, that have this very unhealthy attitude toward sex. And that book of Genesis,
Yeah.
Adam and Eve and all that, that's where that binary idea comes from. If you go to cultures that didn't have that as part of their culture from day one, they don't think like that about people. I mean, there are cultures, when they look at colors, for example, they might tell you they see only two colors, like the warmer colors and the cooler colors. No, of course they see exactly what we see, but culture teaches you where to draw the lines, how to label things, how to value them.
Yeah.
And so in some cultures, as far as they're concerned, there's only two groups of colors, and we have like 200 versions of white. Yes. So, but those same cultures, when they look at people, see a rainbow. And when we look at people, we see two groups.
Yeah.
Females. And when there's anybody who doesn't clearly fit into one of those groups, we scrutinize them. We, oh, which one are you? Like, we have to know before we can even carry on a conversation. I mean, that's how sexist our culture is. We need to put you into one of those two categories to comfortably even interact with you. So sex and everything about sex is a spectrum, as a continuum. So physical sex, the genitalia, internal and external, the way they're shaped, that's actually a continuum. There are intersex people. Oh, wait, what? Intersex people? Well, they've been carefully hidden away from you by the medical community and religious forces that want to literally, surgically try to shape them into something that more clearly fits into the male or female categories. But intersex people are as natural as the rest of us. And there's many different kinds of intersex people. And there's somebody on that continuum from typical male to typical female on the other end. At every point along the way, there are people on that continuum. Well, and the same goes for what I like to call core sexuality, which includes, to my way of thinking, the genitalia, the physical sex, and then gender identity and sexual orientation. Those are all aspects of what I regard as core sexuality, because we come into the world with those things already shaped. Okay, they're already organized. It's innate. You're persecuting people for things that they can't have no control over. I mean, it's just mean and stupid and ugly.
It is. I agree. Yeah.
And people need to see that ugliness directed toward one of their own loved ones before they wake up. But this is all part of natural diversity. Okay, and people need to realize that they've been made prejudiced by that story of Genesis, whether you're religious or not. It has invaded and permeated our Western cultures and other cultures throughout the world, and caused no end of grief to people who are merely different. And I want to point out that being different is not the same as being disordered. Okay? I mean, some differences are disorders. Other differences are merely that, differences. And as a biologist, I value differences. That's something else you should have learned in Biology 101, and that is more diversity there is in a population, the better off that population is. Diversity is like an insurance policy against changes that will happen in the future. And
Yeah.
the greater the diversity of your population, the more likely at least some of your individuals will be able to withstand that difference and carry on that population in some form. We call that evolution.
Yeah.
Right. So this story of development of sexuality is a story of genes and hormones, like it is for everybody. And by the way, what I'm hoping you're going to give me a chance to tell you what we know about
Please. Yeah.
what
Yeah.
is the scientific understanding of sexual development. And I'm going to talk about mammals with the group of vertebrates that we belong to. That mechanism, physiologists call the organization activation mechanism. And it's called that because our genitalia and the other aspects of our core sexuality are organized, that is, going to shaped before we're born, when we're embryos and fetuses. And in that first trimester is when the genitalia are being shaped. And in the second trimester, and maybe to some extent later as well, is when the brain areas involving sex develop and are organized. And these organizational changes are permanent. There's no reversing them or changing them. They're permanent. So we all know this about the genitalia. You know this. You come into the world with the genitalia of a typical male or of a typical female or maybe of an intersex person. But whatever, those genitalia are already shaped. Okay, they're already organized, and nobody chose them, and nobody learned them. It's just the way it is. Okay, it's just the way it works. And then later in life, with the time we call puberty, the gonads kick in and make hormones, and we have the activation of because we know the genitalia are not really functioning when we are born. So hence the term organization activation mechanism. So let me tell you about that organization story. I'm sure you know that when we start out as embryos, everybody looks alike. Males and females, we all start out with different genitalia that are neither male or female.
Yeah.
And
Not just humans, dare I add. Right.
That's right. Not just humans, all mammals. Okay.
Yeah.
All mammals. We start out looking very much alike. Externally, we have one set of genitalia that is not yet matured. Okay. And internally, we're more like hermaphrodites. We're intersex. We have gonads that can become either ovaries or testes, depending on genes. And we have internal the beginnings of the internal organs for both sexes. The Mullerian duct system, which would, if it develops, becomes the female internal genitalia, and the Wolffian duct system, which if that develops, becomes the male internal genitalia. But everybody starts out with both. Now, let me begin with the female, because the female, although her development is extremely complicated and all kinds of genes are involved, most of us have fairly the wild versions of those genes. So most of us are physically typically female or male. All right, so females do not require any hormones for their development. Okay, female development does not require that the gonads produce any hormones. And so without any hormones, just genetic influences, those external genitalia will become like the normal, typical female genitalia. And internally, the Wolffian duct system, the male system, withers away automatically on its own. And the Mullerian system, the female system, develops on its own without any hormonal influence being required. That is the female. Okay, now let's go to the male. Notice that the mammal body kind of wants to be female in a sense. Without any hormonal intervention, you're going to get a female. And in the case of the male, if it's a Y chromosome fertilizes that egg, and we have now a genetic male XY rather than XX, then on that Y chromosome usually is the SRY gene that codes for a protein that is a transcription factor that will cause the gonads to develop into testes rather than ovaries. Okay. And once that happens, typically the testes produce hormones, 2 of them. We need 2 hormones to get normal male development. One hormone Mullerian inhibiting hormone, you can tell from the name,
Mhm.
inhibits the development of the internal female system. So notice the male has to make a hormone to actively suppress femaleness.
Oh,
And the second hormone is testosterone, the chief so-called male hormone. And that hormone is required for the Wolffian system, the male's internal system, to develop properly. And that hormone then can actually, it also is converted into another hormone, dihydrotestosterone, in the prostate and external genitalia, where that dihydrotestosterone causes masculinization of the external genitalia. But the point is, without these hormones, everybody would look female.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So if there is, let's say, a mutation in a gene that codes for an enzyme that's necessary to make testosterone, then that individual who's a genetic male XY will still develop like a female because the testosterone can't work. Do I make sense?
Oh,
The
okay.
Wolffian system will not develop. The Mullerian system will not develop either because they're making Mullerian inhibiting hormone, but
Whoa, okay.
it worked. And so you could get, for example, you could get somebody who's a genetic male, XY, but looks female because they could never make testosterone when they were embryos. Do I make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Or for the testosterone to work, it has to bind to a receptor protein in the target cells. And if the gene that codes for that receptor protein, which is ironically on the X chromosome that genetic males only get one of from their mothers, if that gene is different and doesn't work the way it normally does, again, even though the individual is making testosterone, the testosterone will not work because the receptor is not working. And again, you will get a form of intersex as a result of that. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So the point is that the genitalia are shaped in the first trimester. So for about the first 6 weeks, we all look alike.
Mhm.
And then by week 12, that story is over. Whatever the genitalia look like, that's what they're going to look like when you're born. Okay. But in the second trimester is when the brain areas for sexual behavior are being organized. So I want to backtrack a little bit. I want to. You were, I thought, going to ask me about sex and gender somewhere along the line.
That was going down the road at some point.
Okay, well, let me
Please
just say
explain
about
because I understand. Yeah.
sex, versus gender. Sex is biological, but it's also cultural, whereas gender is totally cultural. I mean, okay. So I remember as a kid going to the museum and seeing that one island culture in a diorama, they showed weaving was something that only the men did. And another island, weaving was something that only women did. I mean, it was pretty clear, even to me as a kid, that gender is something that's learned. It's not innate, and it changes. And I'm going to be 79 soon, and I have watched gender change in my own culture, right? I mean, when I was a kid, what was appropriate for a female is very different than what is okay now, although, they're trying to take us back to that time in my country. But nevertheless, you know what I mean.
That's scary.
And if I go to another country, what is considered appropriate behavior or whatever for males or females, it'll be different than for this culture. All right. So it's very clear. Gender changes with geography and time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, sex doesn't, but it does change with culture in the sense that, and I want to point out that we have been changing our views on sex for forever. I mean, let me just point something out to you. I made a little table just to show how our ideas about sex and what is male and what is female have changed over the years. So we didn't even know about eggs or sperm until the 17th century, 1669. We found the egg. Remember that guy Leeuwenhoek you learned about in biology? He discovered sperm in his own semen in 1677. And so before that time, we had no idea about eggs or sperm, although that became the primary trait of females and males. Okay. And then in the early 1900s, that's when the first sex chromosomes were discovered in mealworms by Nettie Stevens. And about 20 years later, in monkeys and in people, the X and Y chromosomes. Now, everybody knows about X and Y chromosomes, but that's something that, is fairly recent. Okay.
Yeah.
And before that, nobody had any ideas about chromosomes and sex. And then Barr bodies, which we use for amniocentesis in early stages of embryogenesis. Again, that was something that was discovered in the late 1940s. The hormones, the sex hormones, estrogen and testosterone. Estrogen was first isolated in 1929, testosterone in 1935. And the fact that these hormones work on the brain, and that's why we behave the way we do, and that's why the birds are behaving the way they do in the springtime, and what makes all the animals court and mate and parenting behavior and all that stuff is due to the hormones working on their brains. Okay, that was first discovered by Eugen Steinach. He was really the first neuroendocrinologist. And now, starting in 1991 with Simon LeVay, in 1995 with 1995, with Dick Schwab, was the beginning of the work that I'm going to call the neurobiology of gender identity and sexual orientation.
And this is very recent, 1995. We're talking.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Some people are ignorant, and I don't know that they're willfully ignorant. Like Kevin, you brought up the example. I've never seen a gay tiger. Well, why did it say a gay tiger? Because they existed. It's just that when people did that research, that was an anomaly, and they just tossed it out until they actually started asking the question.
I remember back in my early grad school days with my peers, and we'd be actually witnessing gay sex right in front of our faces, and nobody called it that. We found some other way to explain it, because
or you just wrote it off as not
there
relevant.
were many
to the
biologists who never published these observations for fear they'd be laughed at, So, and now we accept it, most of us anyway. And we realize that we were wrong. Okay. So, my point being that our ideas about sex have been changing as our knowledge changes. And so in a sense, sex is also cultural. I have intersex friends. I have one who was born in the Philippines with ambiguous genitalia. If that person were born here in the United States, they would have surgically mutilated.
According to where they first came from, right? They still do that.
They didn't do. Yes, they do. And some of that is giving us the evidence that we have for gender identity being biological. Okay. And that was really the question that I had in my mind when I started this research around 20 years ago. Is gender identity something that's learned, or is it something innate? And I think the research is pretty clear. To me, anyway, I'm sold that it's innate. And that mechanism that I just explained to you, that if testosterone, if androgens are around during what we call the critical periods of development in the embryo and the fetus, when stem cells are first differentiating, okay, if no testosterone is around, then the organization will be the female organization, which I could also call the default organization, if you will, okay? And if testosterone is around during that critical period of development, then the organization is the typical male organization, or the sort of an altered organization, okay, of that default condition. Well, I gave you all that information about how our ideas about sex have changed over the years, because I am actually saying that I think we need to modify our definitions of male and female again, and we need to consider the brain, when we talk about sex. I'm not talking about the neocortex. I'm not talking about your cerebral hemispheres, which everybody knows about. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about an ancient part of the brain called the diencephalon and the limbic system that all mammals have. And those brain regions in our brains are much the same as they are in other mammals, although, of course, for each species, they get tweaked. And it's from these brain regions that these animals display the instinctive behaviors that we see in courtship and mating and parenting and everything that has to do with sexual and reproductive activity. Now, you know damn well that those birds or your dog or whatever did not learn their sexual behavior.
Yeah.
You know, in fact, I have a sentence I love to say, and that is, if animals had to learn their sexuality, there wouldn't be any animals. Okay. And we have those same brain regions. We also have instincts. You know, we have this higher brain that's connected up with this ancient brain, and so it gets modified and it's more sophisticated. But that doesn't mean that we don't have these urges and feelings, that we aren't wired in such a way so as to respond to our environment emotionally in a particular way, depending on how those brain regions were organized in utero. And because the genitalia are developing in the first trimester, and these brain regions, like the amygdala and the hypothalamus, develop later, it's very possible that the hormone environment would be different during those two time frames. And while most people will come out with a gender identity and a sexual orientation that's in alignment with their physical sex, there will always be people who are different that way. Okay? And that's just how nature works. So, you know, different versions of genes and different levels of hormones, the timing of the hormones, the thresholds of the hormones, the receptors for the hormones, all those things vary. And out of that, we get this immense diversity of people that we are only now beginning to recognize. Why did it take so long? Well, everybody was stifled and suppressed and beaten into, you know, submission and hiding for fear because of the damned religion and all the rest of it, you know, that persecutes people who are sexually different. It took, somehow gay people were able to find each other before the internet. But intersex people and trans people pretty much have relied on the internet to find each other, to learn who they are, to develop a language and understand themselves. You know?
Yeah.
And so now we're beginning to see that there's all this diversity out there. Well, of course they were there all along.
Yeah.
And in cultures, you know, they have been there forever. So even to this, even though Christianity and Islam has, you know, tried to beat people down all over the world, destroy their cultures and convert them, even so, we still, to this day, have, like, in Samoa, I'm probably butchering the pronunciation, what we would call trans women here, Fa'afafini of Samoa, which have been well accepted in their culture since forever. But ever since Christianity got in there, you know, the Samoan women in the church, the ladies' church group, now are stuck between a rock and a hard place, because on the one hand, they want to be good Christians, but on the other hand, trans women have been in their little church group forever, and they know them and they love them, and you know what I'm saying? So in Indonesia, there are places where there are 5 genders: typical male, typical female, androgynous people, what we would call trans women, what we would call trans men. So people in those cultures, when they're little kids and growing up, they look around and oh, I'm like them. There are trans women around them that they can see. Oh, I'm like them. You know?
Yeah.
Culture, kids realize early on that they're different. They may not have language for it, but when you talk to them now, they'll tell you at the age of 3, 4, 5, 6, we knew they were trans. You know, gay people usually take a little bit later, but we know that we're different. We may not have language for it. In another culture, we might be celebrated. We might be special people. They would give us a special spiritual role to play.
Like two-spirited people, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like two-spirit people, exactly. And back in 1951, and by that time, of course, the Abrahamic religions had already spread and destroyed many, many cultures. But still, in 1951, there was a cross-cultural report published by Ford and Beach called Patterns of Sexual Behavior, where they looked at cultures all over the world, every continent: Oceania, Eurasia, Africa, North America, South America. And 76 cultures, they had lots of data on the sexual behavior. And they found that of those 76 cultures, 49 of them accepted homosexuality. And that was back in 1951, after I'm guessing it would have been 76 out of 76 before Christianity came along, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So there was a lot of information and all that, but to make sure my puny brain got this right. So you're saying, different doesn't mean disadvantage or a disorder.
no.
Neither does mutation, does it?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you know many trans people? Do you know many trans people?
Yeah, well, I do actually. Yes,
Do you?
yes, I do.
I mean, do you have any trans friends? Do you?
I do. I do. Yes.
Good. Well, then you
And
know people.
yes, no people.
Yeah.
And
You know,
also,
they're not all that different. They're just like us, except they're trans.
yeah,
And some of them are
Exactly.
quite
Yeah.
smart and quite talented.
oh, yeah.
Lots of them are.
We are hurting ourselves by persecuting these people. What the hell's wrong with us?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
And also, what I got in there is, although everybody seems to start at the stage of embryonic female per se, it requires a simple level of hormone to make it a male, but it doesn't always happen that precisely. Ergo, you end up with not necessarily the same result. So what you're basically saying is the only thing that's really binary in our species is the outside genitalia. Everything else is
no, that's not binary either.
Yeah.
Because in many intersex people, you have ambiguous genitalia. There's somewhere right smack dab in the middle. You can't really say one way or the other.
It's a spectrum.
there is
It's not
nothing.
a binary. It's a
There is Kevin, there is absolutely nothing binary about sexuality. Physical sex is on a continuum. Gender identity is on a continuum. Sexual orientation, as Kinsey found out way back when, is on a continuum. And the only, I thought about this a long time as a biologist, like, where did this binary idea come from? The stupid story of Genesis. And I believe it's because the gametes are binary in the sense that there's only eggs and sperm.
Okay.
There's no such thing as something in between. There's no third option. There's only eggs and there's only sperm. Of course, every egg is unique, and so is every sperm. But the point is, there's only eggs and sperm, and that's the only thing I can think of that's binary about sex. Okay.
I think a lot of people also have the idea that on a chromosome level, you'll have XX and XY, but I believe there's also more than that, right?
Of course, there is. People, the average person doesn't even know what a chromosome is.
That's true. That's true.
Tell you what, and with the genes that are on that chromosome, they wouldn't be able to tell you what it is. So there are XX males and there are XY females. Okay. If that SRY gene I told you about is mutated so it isn't working, then you're going to get an XY female. And if that SRY gene has broken off the Y chromosome and moved and reattached itself to an X chromosome, you can get an XX male. So there you go. All right. And of course, there are XXY people, XXX, YYY people, all sorts of permutations of those sex chromosomes. So, no, there's nothing binary about sex. Nothing.
Yeah, I think this is the base of the problem. We think in binary terms as a species. So people.
Why? No, you do maybe, but in many cultures they don't. As I just got through telling you, you need to understand that you've learned that, and it's wrong. What you learned is wrong. You've been miseducated. And in many cultures, they look at people and they see this array. They in Indonesia, they see 5 groups, not 2 groups.
No, I think you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. One of the objections I often get into here, and this is one of the other points that you made at the beginning that's very important. You said we are already pre-programmed, essentially.
Yes.
And sexuality is not something that we learn. It's already.
No, in fact, that's the single most important thing I want to say today. I want to say the gender identity and my doorbell.
Put it on mute.
I'm going to try to ignore it. Okay.
You can pause.
All right. So this is important. Gender identity and sexual orientation are determined before birth. They're innate. It's permanent. And this is true for everybody. Now, these ancient brain regions that I mentioned that we share with all the other mammals, everybody has them. You did not choose to be a cisgendered man, Kevin. And Christine, you did not learn or choose to be a straight female. I'm assuming that's what you are. Maybe I'm wrong, but okay.
You're correct.
You did not learn that. You did not choose that, although there was no way for people to know that until we could do experiments and look at these brain regions that the work in animals told us we should look at, you know? So when Simon LeVay studied those gay male brains, he looked at those ancient brain regions I mentioned, the hypothalamus and the amygdala, the limbic system. That's all about feelings. The hypothalamus is about instinctive drives and behaviors. The hypothalamus is what tells you when you're hungry.
Yeah.
What tells you when you're thirsty, sleepy, horny, and all of that. It's governing all these vital processes that, you know what? That hypothalamus is in charge of you. You're not in charge of it. And the feelings that come from the amygdala and the way it hooks up with the hypothalamus, feelings are what make us do everything that we do. All of us. It's what motivates us or not. Some of us can't get out of bed in the morning because we're so depressed. That's how important feelings are. Okay. So, and that's where this gender identity and sexual orientation comes from, these ancient regions. That you can't study gender identity in animals, but we can in people. And Dick Schwab, spent many years trying to harvest brains from transsexual people, they were called way back then, so that he could do this study. The guy was a genius, and his lab is remarkable for the pioneering work that they did. And looking at these brain regions that the animal work told us we should look at, and looking for differences between trans people and cis people, was, gave us the clue as to what areas of the brain are involved in gender identity. You understand what I'm saying? And so that research, which involves the animal work, David Reimer's story, which I'm sure you've heard of, the sexuality of intersex people, which I mentioned a little bit about, and these comparisons of human brains, comparing trans brains with cis brains, or Simon LeVay's work comparing gay brains with straight brains, told us that the brains are different, and the changing hormone levels in adulthood or after birth do not change the organization of these brain regions. They were organized during in utero, and by the time you were born, that wiring was all in place. Now, it may not have been working fully yet. We need to get it activated at puberty, but the point is the wiring is all there. It's kind of like solid state electronics. Yeah.
This is a very important point, because I think we get a lot of objection from. Oh, sorry, I'll let you finish, Doctor.
Well, I wanted to say a corollary of what I just said, that gender identity and sexual orientation are determined before birth. It's innate and it's permanent. And the corollary would be that nobody learns or chooses their gender identity or their sexual orientation, and nobody can change it. It cannot be changed. So conversion therapy is a farce.
Oh,
it's
fuck yeah.
a form of torture.
Yeah.
It doesn't work.
It's illegal in Canada.
And people who are concerned about the teacher being gay or a drag queen reading to their kids in the library, I mean, that's so stupid to be concerned about that.
It is. Yeah.
There is no way that someone can make you gay or trans. There's no way that I can change a straight person from being straight or a gay person from being gay, or that you can't change those things. And so why are you tormenting these people who are mere natural variations? We all should be out there trying to protect them.
Conversion therapy, I think, is illegal in Canada. If you're under 18, you can't.
Well, I hope so.
Yeah,
but
and it should be
everywhere in the world. It's still going on.
I know in the U.S. Do you know Sheldon Helms?
No.
Okay, he's a advocate. How do I want to say it? He is very against conversion therapy. An advocate against conversion therapy. Let's put it that way, right? So yeah, it's I'm glad you're in Canada.
The reason why conversion therapy doesn't work is because nobody learned their gender identity or their sexual orientation. It isn't like some mama, made a mistake when you were little. or that
Well, if you're super religious, oh, it worked, and now I'm married and I've got
it's
children.
ironic to
No,
me that
you're living a
religion is
lie,
championing
right?
this inhumane and cruel persecution of small groups of highly stigmatized and marginalized people. It's just
Absolutely, yeah.
mean and ugly. It's despicable.
I think
It is. Yeah,
one of
yeah.
the things I hear a lot, and there's a person that's very close to me, and that has these concerns about especially the trans community, is because these people are under the assumption, the notion that children's brains are developing, ergo their sexuality might be
So they
developing.
need to do their homework. And I don't really care what they think. They're not experts, and they should know they're not experts. Are they
That's
that
true.
are
But,
they that ignorant that they don't know how ignorant they are? I mean, it isn't like we don't have the science. We do.
yeah,
It's,
I think this is where the pavement hits the road, where the tire hits the road here, because I think they're thinking we're told from a long time your brain isn't fully developed till you're about 25. Ergo,
all right, Kevin, I want to stop you right there because I tried to make that clear earlier, and thank you because I need to make it clear again. I am not talking about your cerebral hemispheres with the neocortex, the part of the brain that most people think about when we think about our brains. I'm talking about this ancient part of the brain that was there long before there was any cerebral hemispheres. Okay. And these brain regions I'm talking about, limbic and hypothalamus, these are not regions where we learn things. Okay. The claim to fame of your cerebral hemispheres, the neocortex, is learning. The plasticity of that neocortex is necessary so that it can be rewired for new memories for learning. Okay. But these places that I'm talking about, which form these, what neuroscientists speculate are networks or circuits, they speculate there's a circuit that when it works, which it's always humming along, giving us this gender identity, and a circuit for sexual orientation. And these areas of the brain do not learn. And you don't want your hypothalamus learning. You don't want those centers that are controlling thirst and hunger and so on. You want to change. You want them to stay the way they are. Do I make sense?
They're
Yeah.
essentially the reptile brain, right? If for lack of a better term here, the animal brain, the part of the reptile brain, right? The very
I'm
primitive.
sorry.
The lizard brain, or like if you wanted to say, in the id, right? These kinds of other analogies.
Freud, you will not find any reference to Freud in any neuroscience journal.
No, but I'm just
Never.
saying,
That
like,
tells you what the scientific community
our audience
thinks
is not
about that.
necessarily biologists, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to make an
Well,
analogy.
they should shut up when
I
about
guess I
biology.
should do that. Okay.
Okay.
I
If
think I
you
will,
don't know
actually.
anything, then be smart enough to shut up and listen to people who do know something. Look at the harm they're doing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's true.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
true. That's true. No, I think
And
you're
this is
right.
something, what I'm saying here is true for everyone. I mean, if we hadn't done this work on trans people and gay people and so on, we still wouldn't know for sure how any of us have become who we are. But now we know. None of us learned or chose our sexual identity or our sexual orientation any more than we chose our genitalia. It's the same mechanism operating.
Can you like, where does culture fit into this?
How you value or don't value these people. Yeah. In our culture, we've been jaded by that damned binary idea from the story of Genesis. And other cultures that haven't, as I've already explained, they see this wide array of natural diversity when they look at people, and they accept it. They let people be who they are.
Yeah.
So for the average idiot out there like myself, what's the difference between somebody who's transgender and somebody who has body dysmorphia?
Good question.
Some people who are transgender have dysmorphia, not all. And I don't know much about that. We don't know much about that scientifically. There's some evidence that the brain regions involved are different from the ones that I just mentioned, and might probably involve higher regions of the brain that have to do with how we see ourselves. Okay, so that's another phenomenon that may or may not be associated with transgenderism.
Because that's usually the latest weapon you hear from the right side of the spectrum says, no, they're not trans. It doesn't exist. It's just, these people just have body dysmorphia, and I find that hard to believe. It's like, no,
Well, again, who are these people?
yeah, fair enough.
What do they know? Who cares? Why should anybody care what they think?
Yeah,
Except that they're able to do damage, you know?
yeah, absolutely, absolutely, perfect. Well, wow, we went through a lot of information there, a lot of information. So,
Well, the take-home message is that we come into the world already sort of sexually shaped, you
mhm,
know? And we discover who we are as we are growing up. Now, if you're a straight cisgendered person, you just assume that that's the way it is for everybody, and you don't even know that you didn't learn that or anything. You might think that you did learn to be who you are, and so on. For the rest of us who are different, we knew that that couldn't be right, you know. And now everybody should know that we, all of us, come into the world as the sexual beings that we are going to be, and we may need that activation for it to kick in 100%, but we discover who we are. We don't learn it.
mhm.
We don't choose it. We discover it.
Fantastic, and that's a great way to end that. Thank you so much, Dr. Drantz. I really appreciate that. If
Thank
people
you
want,
for having me.
no, my pleasure. If people want to find out more about your research and all the stuff you do, where can they find you?
Let's see. I do have
You do have a blog.
I have a blog. Yeah. Try Dr. Drantz Science and Sexuality, I think it is. You just Google me and you'll find it.
Yeah, we'll put it in the comments.
Dr. Drantz, before I let you go, I gotta have you say hi. This is Dr. Veronica Drantz, and I took a left in the valley.
Thank you.
Can you say it? It's like part of our promo thing.